I walked into that private dining room, believing this was the night my work would finally be recognized. The linen was crisp, the silver gleamed, and the air smelled faintly of seared steak and expensive wine. At 33, holding the title of project director for a system I had nurtured from the ground up, I thought I belonged at that table. But belonging evaporated the moment Lucas Drayton, the CEO's son, stood with the confidence of inherited power. "Aveline Ross has proven herself incompetent," he announced, his voice cutting through the low hum of conversation. "She nearly ruined the project." The words landed like a slap. Laughter and clinking glasses from other tables faded as silence spread. I could feel every pair of eyes, clients, executives, even waitstaff, pivot toward me. My mouth opened, but nothing came. My chest tightened, my tongue heavy, my body frozen in place. Lucas went on, his tone dripping with manufactured regret. "We cannot allow her mistakes to endanger this deal. Effective immediately. She is no longer with us." That was it. No meeting, no warning, no dignity. Just a public execution of my career in front of people whose respect I had worked a lifetime to earn. Heat crawled up my neck, yet my hands shook with cold. I wanted to fight, to shout, to prove him wrong, but fear of seeming desperate chained me to silence. The client's expressions told their own story: discomfort, confusion, and pity. One man shifted awkwardly in his chair. Another avoided my gaze entirely. I gathered my purse with trembling fingers, rising slowly, as though moving underwater. My legs felt weightless, detached, like they no longer belonged to me. I whispered an apology no one acknowledged, my voice cracking on the way out. If you've ever been humiliated at work or had someone steal credit for your efforts, hit that like button and share your story in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. Don't forget to take care of yourself by exercising every day and follow me until the end of this story. And then, I noticed him at the next table, a silver-haired man in a navy suit, posture straight, eyes unflinching. He had been watching the entire scene, not with idle curiosity, but with a focus so sharp it pierced through my fog of shame. His expression carried no pity, only something closer to calculation, like he had just witnessed more than humiliation. I didn't know his name yet, Magnus Hale, but I felt his gaze follow me as I walked out, every step echoing the death of one chapter. And, though I could not see it then, the birth of another. The cool night air hit my face the moment I stepped out of the restaurant, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning in my cheeks. My eyes stung, and though I tried to blink the tears back, they spilled anyway, hot and humiliating. The door closed behind me, muffling the murmur of conversations that had carried on after my very public dismissal. For a moment, I just stood there on the sidewalk, clutching my purse like it was the last thing tethering me to reality. I wanted to disappear into the dark, to find a rideshare and bury myself under the covers of my bed. Instead, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart sank. I braced myself for a pitying word from one of the diners. Maybe even a recording shoved in my face by someone who thought my humiliation was entertainment. But when I turned, it wasn't a gawker. It was the silver-haired man I had noticed at the next table. His presence was sharp, deliberate, like he had chosen this moment with precision. "Ms. Ross," he said evenly, his voice calm yet cutting through the city noise. I couldn't help overhearing what just transpired. He held out a sleek, embossed card between two fingers. Magnus Hale, Hale Ventures. The name hit me like a jolt. I had read enough industry articles to know who he was. A titan in venture capital, known for backing technologies others dismissed as too ambitious. But why would he be standing in front of me now? My embarrassment flared again, and I hesitated before accepting the card, afraid my trembling hands would betray me. "I have an office in the financial district," he continued, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'd like to hear more about your system. His words almost didn't register. 9 o'clock tomorrow? I had just been fired, humiliated, and accused of incompetence. Yet here was a man whose portfolio was worth billions inviting me to his office, as though none of that mattered. My instinct was to laugh bitterly, to tell him he had just witnessed my career collapse. But another voice inside me whispered a cruel reminder of reality. I still had $40,000 in student loans hanging over me, interest compounding every month like a relentless tide. And then there was my mother. Her heart condition required medication and regular monitoring, all covered under the health insurance tied to my job. Without that coverage, I wasn't sure how I could keep her care consistent. The thought made my stomach knot. Losing my career was devastating, but losing the ability to protect my mother's health was unbearable. I looked back at Hale, my throat dry. "You don't understand," I murmured. "They said I was incompetent, that I ruined the project." For the first time, a flicker of steel flashed in his eyes. He shook his head. "No. Incompetent people do not build adaptive security systems with behavioral authentication layers. I listened carefully to what you said tonight. It was precise, it was original, and it was valuable." The blunt certainty in his tone startled me more than his words. He wasn't comforting me. He wasn't offering pity. He was stating a fact, as though he had already weighed and measured me, and found my worth undeniable. A flush of curiosity cut through the haze of shame. Why would a man like Magnus Hale take such an interest in me? The card in my hand felt heavier now, embossed letters pressing into my palm like a challenge. I still burned with humiliation. But beneath it, another sensation stirred, an unfamiliar pull toward possibility. I didn't know if I had the strength to show up at his office in the morning, but part of me already knew I would. That night, after Magnus Hale's card sat like a burning ember in my purse, I found myself drifting back to the girl I used to be. Before titles and contracts, before boardrooms and betrayals, I was just a quiet kid in a cramped suburban bedroom, staring at the glow of an old second-hand computer my parents could barely afford. Other girls pinned posters of pop stars on their walls. Mine were covered with sticky notes filled with half-written code, variables scratched in different colors, algorithms that made sense only to me. I taught myself to code at 11, piecing together knowledge from library books and outdated online forums. The thrill of making a line of text turn into something functional felt like magic, a language only I could translate. My parents didn't always understand what I was doing, but they supported me with quiet faith. They saw me light up when logic clicked, and that was enough. Years later, when the acceptance letter from MIT arrived, I held it with trembling hands, unable to believe that my hours of solitary experimentation had carried me that far. Yet, stepping onto campus, exhilaration quickly tangled with fear. I was surrounded by students from private academies, children of CEOs and venture capitalists, people whose resumes already looked like careers. My public school background felt embarrassingly thin. I carried thrift store clothes while they compared internships at Silicon Valley startups. The gap made me shrink inside myself. I remember one night in particular, sitting at my desk in a drafty dorm room, staring at a problem set I couldn't solve. Tears blurred the screen as I whispered to myself, "Maybe I don't belong here." The weight of inadequacy pressed so hard that I drafted an email to withdraw. My finger hovered over send. That was when the phone rang. My mother's voice came through, tired but steady. I confessed my doubts, expecting disappointment. Instead, she paused and said softly, "Aveline, you don't need to be like them. You only need to be better than the person you were yesterday." Those words lodged in me like an anchor. I deleted the email and forced myself back to the assignment. Graduating with honors didn't erase the memory of that doubt, entering the workforce. I carried both my credentials and my insecurities. The tech world was still a place where meetings often mistook me for the note-taker, not the lead architect. I learned to swallow interruptions, to push harder, just to prove I deserved to sit at the table. As I lay awake replaying everything, another memory surfaced, one I had brushed aside until now. A few months ago, Lucas Drayton had casually asked to borrow my laptop. "Just need to check an email quickly," he'd said with that effortless charm that made others laugh and nod. I had handed it over, distracted, not thinking much of it. But now, in the shadow of his accusations and his sudden fluency in ideas that had been mine, a chill rippled through me. Had he scrolled through my drafts? Had he glimpsed the rough framework of the adaptive system before it was ready? The humiliation of that dinner still clung to my skin, but underneath it, suspicion began to take root. I had spent years battling the feeling that I didn't belong, only to find that someone else had weaponized my own work against me. The memory of my mother's words echoed again, better than yesterday. I didn't yet know how, but I felt the faint stirrings of resolve. Tomorrow at 9, in Magnus Hale's office, I would have to decide whether I was finished or just beginning. The first time I heard the name Sentinel Corps spoken aloud in public, it should have been one of the proudest moments of my career. Instead, it was the moment my throat closed, with a bitterness so sharp I could barely breathe. I was seated in the audience of a packed conference hall, the kind of event I had once dreamed of attending, not as a guest, but as a speaker. The lights dimmed, applause swelled, and Lucas Drayton took the stage. My system, my vision, was about to be introduced to the world. Only it wasn't my name they applauded. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucas began, his tone smooth and polished, "I am honored to present Sentinel Core, a breakthrough innovation from the Drayton Innovation Team. This system represents the future of cybersecurity." His voice rang with authority, as though the hours of coding, testing, and revising had belonged to him. My hands tightened into fists in my lap. Every line he recited, every diagram on the screen, was a piece of me. Yet my name had been erased as cleanly as chalk from a board. I waited for the acknowledgement, telling myself maybe it would come in the second slide, or in the credits at the end. Instead, I saw something that made my stomach drop further than I thought possible. The official documentation displayed on the massive screen listed lead architect, Lucas Drayton, followed by a bold heading, Team Drayton Innovation. My name wasn't there, not in the credits, not in the appendix, not even in the smallest print. I felt heat rising in my chest, climbing to my face, yet my body refused to move. My throat burned with words I couldn't speak. Around me, the audience leaned forward in admiration, murmuring about the brilliance of the design. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them they were applauding a thief. But instead, I sat frozen, every muscle taut, every breath shallow. The twist of betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Lucas hadn't simply claimed credit. He had scrubbed me from the record entirely, without proof of authorship. How could I defend myself later? My years of work now wore someone else's name, like a stolen identity. I remembered the late nights alone in the office, eyes aching as I debugged stubborn lines of code. I remembered the moments of elation when Sentinel Core finally detected anomalies faster than anything else on the market. All of those memories surged together, like a flood pressing against a dam. And the dam was my own self-control. My heart screamed. That was mine. My lips never moved. When the audience rose to give Lucas a standing ovation, I remained seated, numb and nauseated. I stared at the stage, but all I could see were the hours I'd lost, the sacrifices I'd made, the belief I'd clung to that good work would speak for itself. Instead, my silence had given him the chance to rewrite history. As the lights brightened and people rushed forward to shake Lucas's hand. I slipped out of the row, my chest tight, my pulse thundering. Each step toward the exit felt heavy with swallowed rage. My jaw ached from clenching it shut. I wanted to break down, but I forced myself to keep walking. The humiliation was complete, but the fury burning underneath refused to die. Outside, the cold air hit me again, a cruel reminder of the contrast between the applause inside and the invisibility waiting for me out here. They might have erased my name from the slides, but they hadn't erased the truth. Sentinel core lived in me, and no matter how deep they buried my contribution, I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. This silence would not last forever. The morning after the conference, I woke to the shrill ping of my inbox. For one suspended second, I hoped it might be a message of support, maybe a colleague who had seen through the performance on stage. Instead, the subject line made my stomach drop. Termination and confidentiality notice. My hands shook as I opened it. The words bled together on the screen. But the message was clear. The legal department of Drayton Systems was formally accusing me of data theft. They claimed I had attempted to remove proprietary code without authorization, a violation that not only justified my firing, but also triggered their strictest penalties. Worse still, the email reminded me of the 24-month non-compete clause buried in my contract. 2 years in which I would be legally barred from working on any comparable security systems, effectively exiling me from the only field I had ever known. 2 years. My chest tightened as the number echoed in my head. In 2 years, student loan interest would balloon far beyond the $40,000 I already owed. In 2 years, my mother's fragile heart condition might worsen, and without stable insurance, her medical care would become impossible to maintain. I pictured her medication bottles lined up on the kitchen counter, each one a reminder that my paycheck wasn't just mine, it was her lifeline. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, but the despair didn't lift. I had given this company everything: late nights, missed birthdays, years of loyalty, and now they painted me as a thief. The weight of it pressed down until I could hardly breathe. If the non-compete held, I couldn't work in cybersecurity anywhere. And without work, the loans and hospital bills would swallow me whole. I scrolled further, my stomach souring with every line. That was when I saw it. Annex 17. It was referenced as proof of their airtight case, attached as a scanned document. I opened it, expecting to see my own signature. What I found made the room spin. The annex laid out additional restrictions beyond the standard contract, expanded definitions of intellectual property, harsher penalties for breach, and a clause that bound me specifically from asserting ownership of derivative technologies. And at the bottom, in neat digital ink, was the CEO's signature, but not mine. I stared at the empty line where my name should have been, then back at the screen. According to the metadata, the document had been executed months earlier, yet I had never seen this annex, never agreed to it, never signed it. Still, there it was, sitting in my personnel file as if it had been part of my contract all along. A cold wave of dread coursed through me. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had fabricated a cage to keep me from reclaiming it. My pulse hammered in my ears as I realized how impossible the situation looked from the outside. Lucas had erased my name from Sentinel Core. Now the company had paperwork proving that any claim I made would be invalid. I dropped my head into my hands. Despair pressed heavier than any humiliation I had felt at the restaurant. At least then. I had been able to tell myself I still knew the truth. But here, the truth itself was being rewritten with signatures and clauses I had never touched. My mother's voice echoed in memory, reminding me to be better than yesterday. But I couldn't see a path forward. Every option led to ruin, poverty, lawsuits, or the slow erosion of everything I had built. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, listening to the hum of my refrigerator and the faint traffic outside. Life was carrying on without me, indifferent to the collapse of mine. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. For the first time, I wondered if the fight was already lost. The next morning, I walked into the gleaming lobby of Hale Ventures with my stomach twisted into knots. Marble floors stretched beneath vaulted ceilings, polished to such a shine that my reflection stared back at me with red-rimmed eyes and a face that still carried the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. I felt small in that space, like an imposter sneaking into a world that didn't belong to me. Yet clutched in my hand was the embossed card Magnus Hale had given me, the reason I had forced myself out of bed. His assistant led me through a glass corridor, her heels clicking like a metronome to my heartbeat. When she opened the door to his office, I found him already standing by the window, framed by the city skyline. He was exactly as he had appeared in the restaurant: silver hair, sharp suit, posture radiating control. I braced for the cutting dismissal I half expected. Instead, he gestured toward a chair. "Ms. Ross, please." His tone was even, precise, like a man accustomed to being obeyed. I sat, gripping the strap of my purse to keep my hands from shaking. "If you came here to tell me what I already know, that my career is over, you're wasting your time," I muttered, the bitterness leaking out before I could stop it. He studied me for a long moment. "That's not why you're here. You built Sentinel Core. I know it. And so do you. The rest is just theater." The certainty in his voice jolted me. No one had said those words since this nightmare began. For a fragile second, something in my chest stirred. Relief. Maybe even hope. But then I remembered the email. The legal threats. Annex 17. My brief spark dimmed. "They've locked me out," I whispered. "They claim I stole from them. And the contract says I can't work in this field for 2 years. I can't fight that." Magnus walked to his desk and tapped a tablet. "Actually, you can. My legal team reviewed your documents overnight. Annex 17 is unenforceable. It was never approved by the board of directors, which makes it void under corporate law." I blinked. "What?" He turned the screen toward me. It displayed a meticulous analysis, citations highlighted in yellow. They tried to tighten the chains, but in their haste, they skipped procedure. Without board ratification, Annex 17 is nothing but paper. They can wave it around. But in court, it collapses. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I traced the words on the screen, my pulse hammering. Could it be true? Had the cage they built around me already cracked? The despair that had nearly drowned me last night loosened its grip, replaced by a thin thread of possibility. Magnus leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're not here because I feel sorry for you. I don't invest in pity, I invest in talent, and from what I've seen, you're a builder, not a thief. The question is whether you're ready to prove it." I swallowed hard. His words carried weight, but they also carried risk. If I stepped forward, I could still face lawsuits, still lose everything. Yet the alternative: 2 years of silence, debt crushing me, my mother's care at risk, felt like slow death. I closed my eyes, hearing my mother's voice echo from years ago. "You only need to be better than yesterday." That fragile memory stitched itself to this fragile hope, pulling me upright again. When I opened my eyes, Magnus was still watching, unblinking. "Then let's prove it," I said softly, though my voice trembled. For the first time in days, I felt like I had spoken not from despair, but from choice. When Magnus Hale asked if I was ready to lead a new division under his banner, the word "yes" slipped out before fear could stop it. The sound of my own voice startled me. For days, I had been drowning in humiliation, despair, and self-doubt. Now, somehow, I had just agreed to step into the unknown. My palms were damp as I shook his hand, but beneath the tremor was a surge of something stronger: resolve. Magnus didn't waste time. "You'll have full authority," he said. "No endless approvals, no committees slowing you down. If you make a decision, it stands." Those words alone felt revolutionary. At Drayton Systems, even the smallest resource request had to crawl through 10 different desks before it reached anyone with the power to say yes. Here, Magnus was handing me the steering wheel outright, the weight of responsibility pressed against my chest, both exhilarating and terrifying. Later that day, I was introduced to the small team he had already assembled: 5 developers from diverse backgrounds, each with specialties ranging from penetration testing to neural network security. Their faces were expectant, waiting for me to outline the vision. My voice wavered at first, but I laid out the foundations of Sentinel Core, describing the adaptive layers, the triple verification model, and the behavioral component that had set my design apart. They listened closely, and for the first time in months, I wasn't interrupted or dismissed. I was heard. Still, the pressure gnawed at me. Could I really rebuild what had taken 18 months at Drayton in just weeks? Could I carry this team and prove myself while the shadow of Lucas loomed so large? The determination inside me was sharp, but it trembled like glass under strain. During a late-night strategy session, as the others discussed architecture diagrams across glowing monitors, one of the engineers, Daria, a sharp-eyed systems analyst, pulled me aside. "There's something you should know," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "What is it?" She hesitated before continuing. "One of our contacts inside Drayton said Lucas has a partial copy of your original drafts from your personal drive." The words hit me like ice water. My mind raced back to that moment when Lucas had borrowed my laptop under the pretense of checking an email. My gut clenched. He hadn't just stolen credit. He had stolen fragments of the actual code. But Daria wasn't finished. "It's incomplete," she added quickly. "He doesn't have the behavioral identification algorithm. Apparently, he's been struggling to replicate it. They say he doesn't understand how it integrates into the anomaly detection core." Relief and dread collided inside me. The behavioral algorithm was the heart of the system, the piece that made Sentinel Core truly adaptive. Without it, Lucas had a hollow shell, but with enough resources, he might eventually brute force a version that worked. My advantage wasn't in the files, it was in me. The algorithm existed only in my head, scribbled once on a notebook I had since burned after transferring the logic into code. I drew in a shaky breath. The thought that Lucas had violated my trust so directly reignited the old sting of betrayal. But it also clarified something important. They could steal my drafts, smear my name, even invent contracts I had never signed. But they couldn't replicate what lived in my memory. The instincts I had honed through years of work. I looked back at Daria, my voice steadier than I felt. "Then that's what we build on. They can chase shadows. We'll create the real thing." As I walked back to the glowing screens and my waiting team, determination hummed beneath the surface of my fear. I was still trembling inside, still uncertain whether I was enough. But I also knew this. For the first time in a long time, the fight wasn't slipping through my fingers. It was just beginning. The days blurred into nights, and the nights back into days. Under the fluorescent glow of Hale Ventures' lab, time lost its meaning. We had organized the team into rotating shifts, so someone was always at the terminals, coding, testing, or monitoring performance. It was a relentless cycle, and I found myself staying through multiple shifts, refusing to leave even when the exhaustion turned my vision hazy. More than once, I woke to the sound of keyboards clicking. My body curled uncomfortably on the office sofa with a half-empty coffee cup still balanced on the floor beside me. The pressure was unrelenting. 6 weeks to rebuild what had once taken me 18 months. And not just rebuild, but improve it enough to eclipse whatever Lucas presented. The weight of every second pressed down on my shoulders. Each delay felt catastrophic, each bug a personal failure. My chest ached from the constant tension, and my jaw hurt from clenching against the fear that maybe, just maybe, we couldn't pull it off. But it wasn't only the project on the line. Every hour I worked carried the echo of my mother's breathing, the medical bills waiting at the edge of my thoughts. One night, when the team had finally convinced me to take a short break, I stepped into the quiet of the stairwell and called her. The familiar hiss of her oxygen machine came through first, followed by her voice, soft but steady. "Don't give up. You deserve to be recognized." Her words cut through the fog of exhaustion. I closed my eyes and pressed the phone tighter to my ear, letting the reassurance wash over me. For a brief moment, I wasn't the woman racing against an impossible clock or the professional branded a thief. I was just her daughter, holding on to the voice that had steadied me since I was a girl. When I returned to the lab, the air felt a little lighter, though the grind remained merciless. We pushed forward, fixing integration issues, testing anomaly detection, rewriting code for efficiency. Every improvement mattered, but the deadline loomed like a ticking bomb none of us could defuse. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. While reviewing access logs one night, my eyes caught something that made my pulse spike. Among the timestamps and system IDs, there was an entry showing a login from my old Drayton admin credentials that should have been deactivated the day they escorted me out. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling. The log showed that the account had accessed my personal development environment. Files I thought were secure. Files I thought were mine. The realization made my skin crawl. Lucas! It had to be him. He must have exploited his administrative authority before my departure to slip past the safeguards and copy my drafts. Anger flared hot in my chest, but it tangled with dread. How much had he taken? How much did he understand? My thoughts raced through every module, every script I had left behind. Yet even as panic clawed at me, I clung to the one shred of reassurance. The behavioral algorithm wasn't there. That code had lived only in my head, reconstructed from years of intuition and trial. He could copy lines, but not the essence. Still, the knowledge that he had invaded my space left me shaken. It wasn't just theft, it was violation. A reminder of how little control I had once held at Drayton. Sitting alone in the lab, staring at the glowing screen, the suffocating pressure closed in again. The deadline, my mother's health, the betrayal, the intrusion. It all pressed against me at once, stealing the air from my lungs. And yet, beneath the crushing weight, a single thought pushed through. If Lucas was fighting dirty, then the only way forward was to outpace him with truth. With brilliance he couldn't replicate. My fear was real, but so was my determination, even as exhaustion dragged me down. I rose from the chair and went back to the whiteboard. Sentinel Core wouldn't just survive this, it would become undeniable. The headline appeared on every major tech outlet by sunrise. Drayton Systems poised to secure $3 billion government contract. My chest constricted as I scrolled through article after article, each one plastered with Lucas Drayton's face. The captions praised him as a visionary, the youngest security architect to ever lead a national defense initiative. My throat tightened until I thought I might choke. There he was, smiling under the spotlight, wearing the confidence that came with stolen work. My work. The system he was parading had been born from nights I spent hunched over a keyboard, driven by nothing more than stubborn belief. Now it had his name on it, and the world was applauding. Every line I read made my pulse race faster. $3 billion. Largest contract in cybersecurity history. Lucas Drayton, the industry's rising star. I felt sick, like the ground beneath me had shifted and I was sliding toward a cliff I couldn't stop. The team around me worked quietly, but I could feel their eyes flicking toward me, gauging my reaction. My palms were slick against the glass of my phone, and I had to set it down before I shattered it. That night, Magnus called me into his office. He closed the door behind us, his expression unreadable. I braced for bad news, expecting him to say what I already feared, that Drayton's momentum was unstoppable, that their publicity machine would drown out whatever we built. Instead, he tapped the corner of a thick folder on his desk. "We've been digging," he said, "and we found something you need to know." I leaned forward, my heart hammering. "There's a clause buried deep in the government's procurement framework," Magnus explained, his voice calm but deliberate. "For contracts of this size, the system's original author must validate the final implementation. Without that confirmation, the contract is automatically voided." For a moment, the words didn't register. Then they did, and my stomach lurched. "What do you mean? The original author?" Magnus met my eyes. "It means you, Aveline, not Lucas, not Drayton. You're the only one who can legally authenticate Sentinel Core." My breath caught. The anxiety that had been pressing on me for days surged to a breaking point. On one hand, it meant Lucas's empire rested on a fault line he didn't even know existed. On the other, it meant I was now the crack in the dam. If they discovered this clause, they would come for me, legally, publicly, maybe even personally. I was both the threat and the target. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "So, if they sign this deal, and my name isn't on it, it collapses," Magnus finished, his tone steady. $3 billion, gone, overnight. I pressed a hand against my chest, trying to slow my breathing. The number echoed in my head, impossibly large, impossibly heavy. The idea that I held the key to undoing it terrified me as much as it relieved me. Anxiety buzzed under my skin like static, filling every inch of me. Magnus leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharp. "This is why Lucas tried so hard to erase you. He may not even realize this clause exists, but someone at Drayton must have suspected. That's why Annex 17 was fabricated. They wanted you bound and silent before the contract reached this stage." The puzzle pieces clicked together. But instead of clarity, all I felt was the suffocating weight of expectation. My mother's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Don't give up. Con A. You deserve to be recognized." But what if recognition destroyed me? What if stepping forward meant being dragged into a legal war I couldn't afford? I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. Fear coursed through me. But beneath it, something else stirred, a fragile conviction that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as powerless as I felt. Still, the anxiety didn't let up. I walked out of Magnus's office with my heart pounding like a drum, knowing that every breath from here on carried the weight of $3 billion. The auditorium was packed, every seat filled with government officials, industry leaders, and journalists. I sat in the wings with my team, my hands clenched so tightly, my knuckles blanched. Lucas stood on stage, perfectly framed by the spotlights. His voice carried across the room with the confidence of a man who had never known doubt. "Today," he announced, "Drayton Systems unveils the future of national defense, Sentinel Core, the most advanced adaptive security framework in the industry." Applause thundered. My stomach twisted, though I forced myself to watch. His slides flickered across the massive screen, diagrams I knew by heart, phrases I had once scribbled in notebooks during sleepless nights. It was like seeing my own reflection stolen and distorted, polished into a performance meant to erase me. Then came the demonstration. Lucas initiated a series of standard attack simulations, the kind any mid-tier security product could repel. The system responded on cue, blocking and neutralizing threats in a way that looked impressive to the untrained eye. The audience murmured with approval, but when he pushed further, when his engineers triggered a more sophisticated exploit, The cracks appeared. Latency ballooned. The system lagged behind the attack, blocking some intrusions but missing others. Lucas glossed over the results with smooth words. But I saw it. So did anyone in the room with technical expertise. Sentinel Core, without the behavioral algorithm, was a skeleton dressed in armor too thin to withstand real war. My heart pounded as the moderator announced the next presenter. Hale Ventures, with lead architect Aveline Ross. My legs trembled as I rose. Every step toward the stage felt like walking a tightrope stretched across a canyon. My body screamed to turn back, but something stronger kept me moving. The knowledge that this was my moment to reclaim what had been stolen. The lights hit me, blinding at first. I heard the faint ripple of whispers, my name, my dismissal, the scandal Lucas had orchestrated. My throat was dry, but I forced my voice steady. Good afternoon, my name is Aveline Ross, and today I'll show you what Sentinel Core was truly designed to do. Behind me, the screen came alive with our build, the system my team and I had rebuilt under Hale Ventures. I walked the audience through the architecture, the triple-layer authentication, the contextual analysis, and finally, the missing piece, behavioral identification. My hands shook as I gestured, but my voice carried firmer with each word. Then came the test. I glanced at Jessica, who gave me a small nod before triggering the demo. We'll subject Sentinel Core to a 0-day exploit, I said, the words echoing in the hushed hall. An attack no one has seen before. On the screen, lines of code surged as the exploit launched. For a heartbeat. Silence hung heavy. Then, Sentinel Core reacted, detecting subtle anomalies, isolating the threat, and neutralizing it in real time. Performance metrics spiked across the display. 99.4% neutralization rate. Negligible latency. The auditorium erupted. Gasps, murmurs, scattered applause that swelled into thunder. Even seasoned officials leaned forward, scribbling notes, whispering to one another. Cameras flashed. I caught sight of Lucas in the second row, his jaw clenched, his smile gone. My hands were still trembling at my sides, but inside, a different current ran, solid, steady, unshakable, for the first time in months. I was not hiding in anyone's shadow. The system was mine, the stage was mine, and so was the truth. As the ovation continued, I exhaled shakily into the microphone. Sentinel Core was never meant to be a performance. It was meant to be protection. And today, you've seen it prove itself. The clapping surged again, filling the cavernous hall. I stood there, trembling but resolute, knowing the tide had finally begun to turn. The applause was still echoing when the first question cut through the noise like a blade. A government official in a dark suit raised his hand, his voice calm but sharp. Ms. Ross, both Drayton Systems and Hale Ventures presented platforms called Sentinel Core. The architectures appear strikingly similar. Can you explain? The air in the auditorium thickened. My pulse thundered in my ears. I knew this question was coming, but hearing it aloud made my throat tighten. Lucas leaned forward in his seat, waiting like a predator ready to pounce. I steadied my breathing, gripping the podium so tightly my fingers ached. Yes, I said, my voice carrying more firmly than I felt. Both systems share foundational principles. Because those principles originate from academic work I published years before I ever joined Drayton Systems. Behind me, the screen lit up with 3 citations, MIT logos crisp at the top. Each paper bore my name, each predating my employment at Drayton. I turned back to the audience. These papers laid the groundwork for adaptive, behavior-based cybersecurity systems. The research was public, accessible to anyone. What distinguishes my current work with Hale Ventures is the behavioral algorithm. which has never been published or shared outside my personal research. A ripple of murmurs swept the room. For a moment, I thought the tide was shifting, until Lucas rose from his seat. "Your Honor, if I may," he said smoothly, addressing the officials as though this were a courtroom. "Ms. Ross is a disgruntled former employee. Her claims of authorship are unverified. Sentinel Core was developed under my supervision at Drayton Systems. Any overlap in her so-called research is coincidental." My stomach lurched, but before I could respond, Magnus Hale stepped forward from the wings. His presence silenced the room like a sudden storm. "With respect," Magnus said, his voice steady as stone. "The truth is neither coincidental nor unverified. Our legal review uncovered a clause in the government's own procurement standards for contracts exceeding $1 billion. The system must be authenticated by its original creator. Without that validation, the agreement is automatically void." The words landed like thunder. I felt the ground shift beneath me as gasps filled the hall. The officials turned sharply toward Lucas. "Is this true?" one demanded. Lucas's confident mask cracked. His lips parted, but no words came. He glanced wildly at his team, at the papers in his folder, as though scrambling for an escape that wasn't there. Magnus pressed the advantage. "Drayton Systems has presented a system built on Ms. Ross's work while simultaneously erasing her name from the record. What they failed to realize is that without her signature, their $3 billion contract collapses on arrival." He turned slightly, gesturing toward me. "And the only person who can provide that validation is standing right here." The silence that followed was absolute. Lucas's face drained of color, his composure unraveling under the weight of the revelation. He stammered, "That clause, no, it can't." But the officials were already conferring, nodding gravely. One leaned into the microphone. "If Mr. Hale's assessment is correct, Drayton Systems' bid is disqualified pending legal review. We cannot proceed without proper authorship validation." The room exploded, journalists scrambling, flashes popping, whispers roaring. I stood frozen at the podium, my hands still trembling, but inside, a strange calm spread. The years of being silenced, dismissed, humiliated, all of it crystallized into this moment. Lucas sank back into his seat, shoulders slumped, the triumph he had paraded minutes earlier collapsing before my eyes. For the first time, I wasn't the one shrinking. He was. And though the tension still hummed through my veins, I realized I was no longer trembling from fear. I was trembling from the weight of justice finally breaking through. When the government's announcement came, it felt like air finally rushing into lungs that had been suffocating for months. Hale Ventures had secured the $3 billion contract. The headlines shouted the news across every publication. Drayton Systems disqualified amid authorship scandal. The story spread like wildfire. Lucas was suspended indefinitely pending internal investigation. His once flawless reputation shredded overnight. Within weeks, the pressure mounted so high that the CEO of Drayton Systems had no choice but to resign. The empire that had stolen from me was crumbling, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the one left in ruins. Winning the contract was more than a victory for Hale Ventures. It was validation for me. My name was on the official documents, listed not as a footnote, but as Chief Security Architect. Seeing those words in black and white, stamped with the authority of the government, lifted something off my shoulders I hadn't realized I had been carrying for years. But the true test of healing came 1 year later. I stood outside La Maison, the same 5-star restaurant where Lucas had humiliated me in front of clients, where I had walked out with mascara-streaked cheeks and the belief that my career was over. This time, I wasn't arriving as a disposable employee. I was hosting. The private dining hall buzzed with laughter and conversation as my team filled the long table. Jessica, Daria, Marcus, Rachel, and James, All of them had stood by me during those brutal weeks of rebuilding Sentinel Core. Together, we had turned betrayal into brilliance. Tonight, we were here to sign a second government contract worth hundreds of millions, expanding Sentinel Core into international applications. As the waiter poured champagne into tall glasses, I let myself soak in the symmetry of the moment. The same chandeliers that had once shone down on my public firing now illuminated my triumph. When the documents were passed across the table, my hand didn't tremble as I signed. Instead, I felt steady, powerful, at peace. The stakes that had haunted me were no longer chains around my neck. My student loans were gone, paid in full. The weight of debt that had shadowed every choice in my 20s had finally lifted. My mother was receiving treatment at one of the nation's top hospitals. Her care covered fully by my new insurance and the salary that came with leadership. I visited her often, and every time I saw her walking a little stronger, breathing a little easier, I knew all the sleepless nights had been worth it. But the twist, the final turn in this story, wasn't about contracts or money. It was about what came next. During those long months of fighting to reclaim my work, I had met too many others with similar stories. Brilliant engineers dismissed, overshadowed, or silenced. Talented women and minorities whose contributions vanished under louder voices. Their pain mirrored my own, and I couldn't shake it. So, with Hale Ventures backing, I established the Ross Initiative for Emerging Engineers, a fund and incubator program designed to give overlooked innovators a platform, mentorship, and the recognition they deserved. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very place that had once been my site of shame was now the birthplace of something transformative. At Lamison, where I had once been humiliated, we announced the first cohort of the initiative. 11 young engineers stepped into a future I had once believed impossible, and for them, it was just beginning. As I looked around that night, at my team raising glasses, at my mother watching proudly from the corner, at the bright eyes of those just starting their journeys, I felt a sense of liberation deeper than revenge. Success had carried me full circle, but revenge was no longer the point. I realized then, the greatest victory isn't proving your enemies wrong. It's creating a world where no one has to fight the same battles alone. Success, I've learned, is not about tearing others down. It's about lifting people up. My story began with humiliation, but it ends here, with pride and freedom. If you've ever felt invisible, if your work was stolen or your voice silenced, know this: your story isn't over. Don't give up. Keep building, keep fighting, and one day, you'll stand in your own circle of triumph. If this journey resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button, pass this story to someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more stories of resilience and redemption.